the story. I'm Leah Rabashkin. Thank you for joining me for Parshas Vayetzei, the seventh Torah portion in the first Chumash. Before I start our Torah learning together, I like to take a minute to welcome myself and everybody into this space of conscious Torah, of choosing where our presence and our energy is, and welcoming all parts of yourself to be present and mine. And then, choosing to dedicate the learning and the Torah and the energy that we are generating and choosing to be with into a part of our lives that need healing, that need prayer, that want to show gratitude to Hashem. And I'll dedicate this Torah learning and the Torah learning that comes from this shir to women and men who are journeying the journey of bringing children, Jewish children, into the world. This parsha speaks so much about Rachel's pain of fertility and Leah's, and we're going to talk about, later on we'll talk about the matriarchs and how every single one of them was born with a challenge with their womb, like with either, according to nature, they were considered barren and unable to, and the meaning behind that and the mystery behind like what God's intention and purpose was there. And I'm also meeting so many women who are trying to raise children with such limited options in terms of, when there's too many children and they can't keep up with that, and the options that are available to build a healthy home with the godly energies and tools and gifts that we need in this world. I hope that we merit to bring light and innovation and the gifts of the true gifts of Hashem towards people already in this challenge on either end. I'm going to start now. I'm going to start from the beginning of the parsha. It's Parshas Vayetzei. And we're introduced to Yaakov's journey, leaving the land of Israel, and how at the end of last week's parsha, Yaakov listens to his mother and his father, and he agrees that it's time to leave and move on from the land of Israel and from his home. And he makes the journey out to Haran, and on the way he stops for 14 years to immerse himself in the protection of Torah and the wisdom of Torah and the truth of Torah, because he knows that he is going to be facing the lies that are outside of the land of Israel, the deception, the klipa that's in the face of him attaining his family and of him attaining his wives. And he knows that the gifts that are there for him come with very intense guardians. And so before he confronts that challenge and takes on that part of his life, he prepares himself by entering into the cocoon of Torah for 14 years. And after 14 years, he feels ready to take on his mission. And before he leaves the land of Israel, he has an experience where he comes to Har HaMoriah, the land that the Beis HaMikdash would be built on in the future, his children would build. And the spot where his father was offered as a sacrifice and had conquered his survival instincts. And he has a dream there. And in the dream, Hashem, communicates to him that he has nothing to be afraid of and that he's going to go into the land, but he's going to come out whole and secure. And Yaakov wakes up from the dream and tells God, he makes a vow that if Hashem is with him and Hashem provides him food and clothing and ensures that he will not have to compromise on any one of the 613 mitzvos, any one of his values or standards, when he comes out of that place, his children will one day build the temple where he's standing, and he will give Meiser. And he takes the rock that had turned into one, united source of protection, and he turns it into a mizbeach. He pours oil on it, and he consecrates it. And after this vow and this communication of Hashem revealing himself, Yaakov takes his stick and he crosses the Jordan River miraculously. And he leaves with joy and bitachon that he knows that he has challenges ahead of him, and he also knows that God promised him that he will come through them with revealed blessings. And so he goes to the land and that his mother is from, ready to take on the life that his mother had left. And he sees a gathering of people by a rock in front of a big, big boulder. And he approaches it and he sees that there's shepherds with their flock of sheep. And he understands that these shepherds as a community replace this rock over their source of water at the end of each day. It was their only asset to provide for their well-being and for their wealth. And so, to protect it from animals, tainting the water, or from other people in the community taking more than another, they would cover this rock with this boulder each day. And in order to remove it, they needed to wait for everyone to arrive, to have the manpower and the strength. And because Lavan didn't have any sons, Rachel was on her way. So Yaakov engages with these people and he asks them if they know who Lavan is, his uncle. And they say they do, and they say, look, his daughter is on his way. And when he sees Rachel, he is immediately filled with the strength that comes from love, from seeing the other side of his soul. His soulmate is in his presence for the first time. And a strength comes into him where he lifts the entire rock single-handedly, and the community drinks from it. They tend to their flock, and he waters Rachel's flock. And it says that Yaakov kisses Rachel, and he bursts into tears. And we're told that, his tears were, he was prophesizing and seeing that in the future, even though they're soulmates, they wouldn't merit to be buried together. And, the flip side to that is his human experience, where he knows that when his father was proposing, or when his father had sent a servant to go and find his wife, Eliezer was able to bestow upon the future bride gifts, nose rings and bracelets and gold and jewelry and garments, and he's coming completely impoverished. And that causes him great pain. Out of his desire to want to give and take care of his soulmate and his beloved, he's anguished that he can't. The backstory for that is on Yaakov's way to, arriving here, his nephew, Eliphaz, the son of Esav, comes and says, my father sent me to murder you, but I was raised in my grandfather Yitzchak's home, and I don't want to. So Yaakov tells him, according to the Torah, someone who doesn't have enough money to influence others is considered dead. So take everything that I have, and I'll have no ability to influence others, and I'll be considered dead. And I thought that was very interesting, that one of the Torah's definitions for death is when a person loses their ability to have influence over another person. And back to this moment, Yaakov introduces himself and tells Rachel that he's there to marry her, that he came to this land to take her and marry her and build a family with her. And it's a version of a proposal, right? And Rachel responds and says, but my father is completely deceptive. She knows the nature of her father, and she's not blind to the home she comes from. And so, the commentators say at that point, Rachel and Yaakov exchange signs that would one day play a role under their chuppah. Or not their chuppah, Leah's chuppah. And Rachel brings Yaakov home to Lavan. Her father had already passed away. And Lavan acts all warm and kind, and he has ulterior motives in mind. How can I benefit from this man's work? How can I use my daughters as financial pawns? And so he welcomes him, and he gives him a job and an income. And at this point, we're introduced to Leah, right? We're introduced to Rachel beside the well, and now the Torah, once Yaakov is in Lavan's home, we're told about Leah. That Leah is the twin sister of Rachel, and the pasuk says that Leah's eyes were swollen and tender, while Rachel was a beautiful woman in comparison. And the Torah compares them in the same pasuk, where even though they're twins, their demeanor and their features reflect a completely different human experience. we're also told that one of the reason why Leah's eyes were so tender is because people would say, oh, Lavan has 2 twin girls, and his sister, Rebecca, has 2 twin boys. The older one will marry the older one, and the younger one for the younger. And in that way, Leah was clued in, or had the awareness that she was destined to marry Esav. And she would sit at the crossroads of her town, and she would ask passerbys for any news that they had heard about Esav and his ways. And with time, she put together who this man's character was. And she was filled with such pain and such dread and such anguish that her entire being, she became known as the sad, almost terrified girl with this heaviness covering over her beauty and her complexion. But most of all, it mentions her tears, how she cried, and she pleaded and prayed with Hashem. And that plays a role in what we'll speak about later, about the portal that Leah is for us and her ability to transform her destiny through her tears and through her prayer. After Leah and Rachel are both introduced to us, the Torah tells us that Yaakov turns to Lavan and he says, I want to marry your daughter. And so I'll work for her for 7 years. And Lavan agrees to this. And the 7 years pass by very, very quickly. And Lavan gathers the people of his community for a wedding ceremony. It's the first time we hear of a wedding ceremony. And you can sense into the character that Yaakov had to face, that we all have to face in this world. Because we are all living the Haran that Yaakov showed us. He gathers all the people in the town, full well knowing that he's about to deceive Yaakov and his daughter in public. And he has no qualms and no shame that he is about to pull off deception on the highest level, literally forcing marriage to somebody without their consent. And he doesn't do this in the dark, and he doesn't do this in his backyard. He does this in the presence of everybody. And actually, I've seen, like in Chassidus, it says that if we want to learn from Klippa, we should learn from its fearlessness. It has no shame and it has no fear to set about to accomplish its mission. And you really see that with Lavan here gathering everybody. And he puts Leah under the wedding canopy, covered by a veil. And Rachel sees what her father's up to, and her heart has mercy on her sister. And she says, I cannot be a witness to the embarrassment that my sister will experience. And so she teaches Leah, the signs. And the little bit that I found on what were the signs, they seemed to be vocal. It seemed to have been with Leah having to use her voice. But I couldn't find any more information on what the actual signs were. And after the next night, the morning comes, and Yaakov sees that he was deceived, and it's actually Leah. And he goes straight to his father-in-law. He doesn't stop to talk to Leah. He doesn't stop to talk to Rachel. He confronts darkness, and he says to Lavan, what have you done? And again, Lavan appears to be this principled man who's full of ethics and morality, and he says, we have rules here in this town. The younger one will not get married before the older one. And how do you even think that I would agree to something like that? What's wrong with you that you would even imagine to ask me for a deal that goes against the customs of my family and our rituals, right? And they create another proposal where Yaakov agrees to work for another 7 years to marry Rachel. But he gets to marry her after the 7 days of Sheva Brachot that he has together with Leah. And it says how Lavan gives over the 2 bondwomen. He had wives, and they had slave daughters that had been his property in his home, Bilhah and Zilpah. And together, as he enters Rachel and Leah into this marriage, he also somehow manages to send forth Bilhah and Zilpah into this marriage as well. Yaakov agrees to work for another 7 years, and 7 days after he marries Leah, he marries Rachel. And Bilhah and Zilpah are bondwomen. They're servants and supporters to their sisters. And then the Torah uses interesting language. It talks about how, again, a comparison of Yaakov's love for Rachel over Leah's love. And Hashem saw that Leah was hated. And in response to that, Hashem opened her womb. It says that Rachel and Leah were both born twin sisters with the inability to have children. They were barren. And with all the matriarchs so far, we see that they have a very active part in in opening up their portal, their rechem, their rachamim. It's this portal of divinity to become a creator. And with Sarah, we see what she goes through, her prayers, her confronting her husband, her bringing Hagar into the marriage as a means to earn the merit. And then you see with Rivka, her prayers for 10 years alongside her husband. And again, the next woman we're introduced to is Leah and her barrenness. And we see no active role that she plays to open up her womb. She doesn't dive into Hashem for this. It's Hashem's choice of responding to her pain, the anguish and the pain that she felt in being in this marriage. And Hashem chooses to open up her womb. Her first child is born, and she names the child Reuven, and then she names Shimon and Levi and Yehuda. And we'll go through the meaning hopefully at the end. And each of these Shvatim, this is going to form the 12 Shvatim, these children, they're born with twin sisters. And it's after Leah has her fourth child that the Torah comes back onto Rachel's experience. She's watching her sister birth children, and she's barren. And after Yehuda is born, it says that Rachel sees her sister's righteousness, and she becomes jealous. And it's interesting that the Torah uses this language because prior to Rachel giving the signs to Leah, it seems that she had to search her heart to see if she would harbor any jealousy towards her sister. Because one of the reasons that the Torah forbids sisters to marry the same man is because of the jealousy that would ensue. And so because Rachel checked her heart and she saw that she had no human jealousy towards her sister, she was able to go ahead and give the signs, knowing that she wouldn't be violating this prohibition. And yet the Torah later uses the language that Rachel was jealous. And it says that she wasn't jealous of Leah's children. She didn't want Leah's children. She was jealous of Leah's righteousness. She assumed that God had blessed Leah with children in response to her righteousness. And so she wondered and she was jealous of how was Leah able to access so much divinity and righteousness, whereas she was judging herself to not be able to. And in response to that, she confronts her husband. And one of the only times we see the patriarchs and matriarchs having disagreement and having confrontation is over the conversation of having children and their fertility challenge. And she turns to Yaakov and she says to him, is this how your parents handled their challenge to open up your mother's womb? Your father prayed for your mother. Why won't you pray for me? And he says to her, my father he was justified in praying for a child. My mother didn't have any children. My father didn't have any children. And I already have children. You're the one who God is not giving children to, but I already have children. And so what right do I have to ask that you have a child? And it also says in this conversation that Yaakov became angry. He had a very, I don't want to say a human experience, but the Torah records him as showing up to this conversation with anger. And Yaakov says, am I God that I can give you a child? And in that dialogue, Yaakov somehow clues Rachel into the fact that, Sarah merited to have children because she chose to suffer on account of Hagar entering the marriage. And so Rachel comes up with this idea that she's going to give Bilhah, her sister, to Yaakov to marry. And in the merit of that, she'll be able to raise this child as though the child is hers. She's not dreaming that she herself would become pregnant. She's saying, I'll access motherhood through my sister, through my servant. And Yaakov agrees to this, and Bilhah does conceive a child with Yaakov, and Rachel names the child Dan, and then again Naphtali, another child. And Leah sees that her womb had stopped giving children, and so she offers Zilpah to Yaakov. And it says that Leah was hoping that Yaakov would say no, that even though he was offering him this opportunity, she was hoping that he would say, you already gave me children, and so why do we need another woman in our marriage? And so there was hurt and pain. But he does agree, and Gad and Asher are born from Zilpah. And one day, Reuven, Leah's oldest child, had been out in the field, and he had been walking through, and he saw a flower called dudaim, or mandrakes. And some commentators say that they had fertility powers, and others said that they had psychedelic powers. And he comes and he offers it to his mother. And Rachel is alongside her, and she says, can I have these? And Leah turns to her and says, not only did you take my husband, you also want to take my flowers? Which is a very unusual dialogue, because we know that Rachel was the one that invited Leah into the marriage. And so here Leah is speaking as though this was her husband, and Rachel had taken. Whatever happened there, Leah agrees to give Rachel the flowers in exchange for Yaakov Avinu spending the night in Leah's tent. And for some reason, Rachel sees that these flowers are worthwhile to exchange a night with her soulmate and her husband. And Leah goes out to greet Yaakov and explains that he should escort her back to her tent because of the arrangement they had made. And God blesses their night together, and Yisachar is conceived together with the twin sister, like all the Shvatim were, born with a twin sister, and then following that, Zvulun as well. Now we come to Leah's pregnant for the 7th time, and she sees that if she were to give birth, then her sister would not even stand a chance to give birth to the last 2 Shvatim. Leah had the prophecy that 12 sons were going to be born to Yaakov, the 12 tribes of the Jewish people. And one of the reasons that she desired and chose to enter into this marriage was so that she could merit to give birth to these 12 Shvatim, to these portals and these channels that are going to become the Jewish people. And so she calculates that she's up to 6, and each of the maidservants have 2. And if God were to perform a miracle for Rachel, it seems like Leah was the only one who carried the hope that Rachel would become pregnant one day. Because Rachel says, maybe in the merit of me giving you my maidservant, I'll raise a child, I'll have access to motherhood. But Leah still has this vision and this goal that her sister would have children. And so she prays to Hashem that the embryo that had formed within her womb would be transformed. And God listens to her prayer, and it says that what would have been Yosef inside of Leah is transformed to Dinah. And she becomes pregnant with Dinah, and she names her Dinah out of Din. She says, I judged myself and agreed that I was not willing to be the source of humiliation for my sister. And Dinah is born. After Leah prays to Hashem and is partners with Hashem in this miracle, this transformation that happens, Hashem is reminded of Rachel's judgment of herself, that she wasn't willing to be the source of embarrassment for her sister on their wedding night when Leah was under the chuppah, the bridal canopy. And Hashem decides to reward Rachel for her sacrifice on that night, and he listens to Rachel's prayers and he opens her womb. So I guess, from the pasuk it does say that Rachel had been praying to have children. And it says that she chooses to name her child Yosef, and there's a double meaning here. After so many years of not having children, the townspeople would torment Rachel and say, your husband's going to divorce you because you don't earn your keep. You're not having his children. And when he divorces you, you're going to be forced into marriage with Esav. And so she was living in the terror that her destiny would be in Esav's hands. Literally the flip experience that her sister Leah had showed up to this marriage, prior to this marriage. And so Esav, from the language of Yosef, she says, Hashem gathered my disgrace. And again, within that child, she also says, God, please give me another child. She asks for another as she's given. At this point, Rivka, Yaakov's mother, sends her wet nurse, the nurse that had accompanied her all from Haran back in the day, and she comes and she says that your brother's wrath has calmed down, and your mother says that it's time for you to make your way back to your home, to Israel. And so Yaakov sees that he's ready to confront Lavan and, engage in his separation. And it also says that once the light of Yosef came into his family, Yaakov felt that he had the strength and the power to take on Lavan and this part of the confrontation. Yosef gave him strength to go about this part of his journey. And so he approaches Lavan and he says to him, it's time for me to go back to my father's land. Please give me my children and my wives. And I served you loyally, faithfully, and I'm ready to go home now. And Lavan says, if only you would stay, but I see you're determined to go, so specify your payment and I'll pay you. And it seems that after Yaakov has his children, it's time for him to amass his wealth and his financial ability to take care of his children. So he stays for a little bit longer, and they create a formula for how they're going to divide the livestock that Yaakov had been taking care of. And obviously Lavan has plans to deceive Yaakov of his wealth, and the Torah says that he changed his agreement and his word 100 times with Yaakov in this ordeal, where he says, you'll be given these sheep, and everything that these sheep give birth to, if they're speckled in a certain color, that will be your assets, and whatever's right. They make an agreement based off of colors and body types and animals, and they separate the flock. And obviously Hashem is with Yaakov, and he blesses him no matter what. And the Torah describes in a very lengthy process where Yaakov uses sticks. He takes sticks from trees and he scrapes different patterns on the sticks, and he puts them at different locations. Some of them he puts beneath water, some of them he puts behind the animals, some of them he puts on the floor, and he is working with God to bless himself and to create a certain outcome. And when I was reading these psukim, I was thinking, why are we spending so much time on understanding how Yaakov amassed his wealth? On the one hand, we see that, Lavan was determined to see his son-in-law leave and his daughters leave with no money. What type of father is sending off his children and his grandchildren with the hopes that he should remain with the inheritance and the children should, make do on the little? What type of man? And even so, Hashem, blesses him. But what I was also noticing was, if you read the psukim that detail what Yaakov did, it seems like Yaakov had the knowing that whatever an animal is seeing at the time that they're mating is going to determine the child that is born to them. And so when the animals looked at stripes, they were, striped children were born. And when the animals looked at spotted children were born. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that a person is where their mind is, where their thoughts are. And we know, in Kabbalah and in Chassidus, we're told that at the time of intimacy between a husband and a wife, the thoughts that each partner has a direct influence over the child and the child's abilities in this world, with the way they come into the world, their starting point, their launching pad. And over here, when you read what Yaakov was doing when he was breeding the cattle, you can so see how he used that to his advantage. And for me, there was like this reminder that Yaakov is showing us this truth that what is present with you during intimacy is going to determine what your children look like and come out, what they're born with their levushim, with their garments. Will they be striped? Will they be spotted? What their persona will be. And through this method, Yaakov becomes extremely wealthy, and he notices that Lavan is no longer cordial to him, and Lavan's expression changed. After Yaakov came into Lavan's family, Lavan was blessed with sons, and these sons had taken over, tending to the flock, and they were speaking about their brother-in-law's stealing of their inheritance. And so Lavan hears about this, and his approach and his demeanor towards his son-in-law changes, and Yaakov picks up on that, and he realizes it's time to go. And before he does, he calls Leah and Rachel into the field, and he has a conversation with them, and he explains to them he details this whole financial challenge he had with his father, and how Lavan had swindled him 100 times. And we hear Rachel and Leah's voice recorded. It's very interesting to notice when a woman's voice is recorded in the Torah. It's so, in which select few psukim do we get to hear directly from them. And on the topic of their inheritance and on their financial, the security of their children and on their financial future, it's interesting to notice how Yaakov has a dialogue with them. He wants them to be on the same page as him and to agree and to be aware of what happened to them financially, and also that he wants their approval to get ready to leave. Are they ready to leave their father's land? And they say, the Torah records them as having one united voice in this decision, and they say the only thing that belongs to us at this point and to our children is the wealth that Hashem took away from our father and he gave to you. We were strangers to our father. He didn't give us a dowry. He sold us. He sold us for 14 years of labor, and he took the wage money that should have been for us, and he took it for himself. And for me, it's interesting and important to notice that the matriarchs are recorded again for protecting their inheritance, for having an opinion and a voice and guiding the financial future of their children, because the financial future of their children is tied together with the covenant of Abraham and their ability to succeed in being the nation, the Jewish nation. And they tell Yaakov, whatever Hashem told you. Yaakov says, Hashem came to me and told me it's time to leave. They say, we're in agreement and you should follow in that plan. So Yaakov makes a decision that he's going to leave without Lavan knowing. And so he gathers his children and his family and his wealth, and he sets out. And 3 days after he leaves, Lavan catches up to him. And prior to that, Hashem comes to Lavan, and Hashem reveals himself to Lavan, and he says to him, beware of speaking to Yaakov, good or bad. And if you look into that Hashem is warning him, don't approach Yaakov. Don't speak good and don't speak bad. Don't speak at all. And it's actually Lavan showing up and ignoring God in this moment. God revealed himself to Lavan, and he has the audacity to override that and to continue going. And he does, and he ends up being the cause of the connection or the cause of his daughter Rachel's life, ending at a young age the way it did. He chooses to go ahead and he confronts Yaakov and again paints himself out to be this loving grandfather that only wanted to kiss his children goodbye and make them a feast. And Yaakov has none of it. He laces through into him and he tells him, I stayed in the frost and in the cold and in the heat. I made sure not one of your animals miscarried. I was a loyal, faithful servant to the top point of halacha. I cared for you as though your wealth was mine. And he doesn't buy into his whole, the loving grandparent. And Lavan goes from, I can kill all of you right now, to, he ends up, making a covenant with Yaakov and saying to Yaakov, take care of my children, take care of my grandchildren, and make sure that you do not allow any other women to enter into your marriage. And those are his parting words, which is also so interesting to see that from the mouth of Klippa, we hear that Klippa wants to make sure that no other women enter into this portal, into this marriage of the Jewish nation. And that's where the parsha ends. When I was reflecting on this parsha and the energies that are present here, I wrote down a few things that I'll read and share, and then we'll, dive into them. So in Yaakov being sent into Haran, it's showing us that he's going into the dark, just like we have to go into the dark. It's the soul leaving the heavenly realms, leaving the land of Israel, and having to descend into our bodies, having to come home into this constricted and confined and dark, residence. And it's going to have to confront the lies within ourselves, the deception that has been there. In that absence of our soul being in our body for so long, Klippa took up shop. It's like, if you buy a building and you leave it vacant, I don't remember the terms, but people come and they set up shop there, and there's laws that protect these people. They've lived in here for X amount of time, and so now you have to go to court to see if you can evict the person who stay there. Squatters, the process of evicting a squatter. And it's the same thing within ourselves. In the space in our bodies that our neshama has not been able to shine, darkness has been able to reside there. And in this week's parsha, we enter into our bodies. We enter into our promised land, into our home. And when we get there, it's full of deception because there are squatters there. There's Klippa there that has set up and has, spoken its lies and has tainted our truth. And even so, what happens? We fall in love. We meet our soulmate. Yaakov meets Rachel. He sees his truth within his body. And that gives him the strength to be able to take on this challenge. We make contact with our neshama. We make contact with our heart that we had to leave. And then we have to do the work of working with Lavan for 14 plus years, right? We have to work and do the healing work and integrate ourselves into our body, right? To help our neshama integrate into our soul. And along the way, the darkness, sets us on an interesting dance where you think you're marrying Rachel and Leah is there, right? The challenges come at you and you have to dance with them because they're also a part of God's plan and they're also a part of the story of coming home. And you have children who are whole because you're doing your work so deeply. So this is coming from, I read how Yaakov Avinu was so committed to his work. He was so mission-oriented and driven that when he, chose to go into Haran, and it says Yaakov left Be'ersheva. And that's a clue for us that he was leaving the covenant that his father and his grandfather had made with the darkness, with Avimelech in Be'ersheva. Be'ersheva got its name from this agreement that Abraham and Yitzchak had made with the darkness. And then Yaakov comes and says, no, I'm not going to be renewing this covenant. I'm going to go through the darkness. Yitzchak and Abraham saw that their mission was to put up a boundary towards darkness and say, you don't get in my way, and I'm going to remain in spiritual highs, and I'm going to permeate my surroundings with holiness and purity and kedusha. And darkness, this is the boundary. You can no longer cross it. And the darkness agreed for Avram and for Yitzchak. But Yaakov saw that he had the power to transform darkness, to go into their territory and to reveal light, and to reveal the light that's actually stamped into them. And so he commits to this path, and he doesn't choose the path of his father, try to get away with the path of his father and grandfather. And so because he approaches his avodah so head-on and so fully, none of his parts have to go into shadow. And therefore, he merits to have a child. All of his children are tzaddikim. There's no Esav and there's no Yishmael. Where Avraham and Yitzchak do have a child, they give birth to a child that's mingled with the dark. Yaakov actually merits to confront every single part of himself, and in that way, no part of him has to be mirrored to him in the face of one of his children struggling. And so all of his sons are tzaddikim, and they're eager and they're open to learning it from their father's ways because they see how committed to the journey he is. He's literally working to ensure that none of his baggages and darkness end up on them. He wants them to show up to the world as a clean slate. And that, invites them to mimic their father's ways and to be perceptive. It says that Reuven was so scrupulous with only taking the mandrakes from certain parts of the field because he saw how careful his father was. Even though he was a young boy, he was aligned with the lifestyle because of Yaakov's commitment to his avodah and his journey. This parsha also introduces us to the portal of sisterhood, of sisters being there for each other in a way that blows your heart and your mind, and on every level, from protecting your sister from shame, right? And helping your sister not have the destiny that she's been crying her whole childhood not to have, to praying on her behalf that your child, that would literally be a tribe in the Jewish people, and handing that over to your sister, right? The whole concept of sisterhood and the role and the divinity that sisterhood is shown to us in this parsha. It's like in all the healing work now, we're hearing about brotherhood and sisterhood. We need to come back together into this space. And we see that very, very clearly as the 12 tribes are born. What enables that? What enables the Jewish people to be born? A sisterhood is formed. Two sisters are committed to sensitivity and prayer and using their spiritual gifts to assist the other. And they literally merit to build the Jewish people, these two sisters. We also see that, on that topic actually of sisterhood, Rachel and Leah give their sisters the opportunity to be their stepsisters, their half-sisters, their bondmaids, to be a part of the Jewish people. And I'll take a minute to mention that the acronym for all the four matriarchs are Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Leah. That forms the word Barzel, which is iron. And the Rebbe comments on it in a few places how if you want to know who the Jewish people are, look at the source of where they come from. They come from iron. They come from unbreakable, unshakable faith, commitment to the journey, commitment to birthing the Jewish people. And the strength to endure comes from the matriarchs. They are the portal, and you see it in their acronym and in their name. Now I'm going to go back to the beginning a little bit, because before Yaakov goes to Haran, it speaks about how he prepares himself by going into a yeshiva to learn for 14 years. And Yaakov is showing us that the path to being able to build the Jewish people, the path to being able to take on your spiritual mission and succeed in it, he's a clue for us. It says like Maisa Avo Siman Labanim, the actions of our fathers are a sign for their children. It's not that it's a lesson, it's a sign. Like, we are going to go through what they went through. Everything that they went through for us. And some things that I saw when I was looking at that is, before Yaakov, has a chance to be successful at his mission, like, look at the home he comes from. He comes from a home of Rivka and Yitzchak, And they're known as the couple that loved each other. They're known as the marriage that we should most desire to emulate and have. So it's telling us that he comes from such a secure bond. The home that he was from really, really held him. And, it says that Esav didn't choose another path other than Torah and his father's way until the age of 13. And so there was a certain safety in his childhood years and the consistency and the love that he experienced there. And then before he's ready to leave, he receives his parents' blessings. His parents agree that he's going to have a different mission than them, and they bless him for it. And they literally pass on everything that they have. They write in a document, it belongs to you. On every end, on a spiritual end and on a physical end, they understand that the future is theirs and theirs to support. And then from there, he goes into the protection of Torah. And then he comes to the land and he needs to lay down. And the Chassidus tells us that before he was able to take on his journey, he needed to surrender his mind. His head and his feet needed to be on the same wavelength, because that would be a huge part of his success. Not to use his head and not to use his mind to try to navigate this. It's beyond our mind. This journey is beyond our mind. Our mind is a tool to get us from point A to point B, and it serves, a role for certain parts of our life. And then we enter stages where we're asked to go beyond our mind. And Yaakov is showing us that before we go into Haran, we won't succeed if we take our mind there. Our brain is literally not compatible to fight darkness. It's not a tool that could understand our love for God and our commitment to our soul. So we're going to have to enter into our body and into our heart and soul in order to succeed. It also speaks about, angels coming to protect him. The angels left him and angels came. And for us to have the awareness that wherever we walk with angels, to have that clarity, that we're not going about our mission on our own. And if only we would believe it, because what we believe becomes true. We literally can protect ourselves and have the assistance the minute we open ourselves up to belief. My husband said a story of the Baal Shem Tov the other week, and he ended off the story and he said, "What do I like about the story? I like that I believe it." Because there was a time that a story like that would have been like, too much to buy into. And the more, the longer I immerse myself in this healing space and in Torah, I'm seeing that when the Rabbeim told us, Maminim b'nei maminim, we are believers, the sons of believers, they were telling us our power is in our belief. If you're not sure, should you be cynical or believe? Know that you will be powerful if you choose to believe anyway. And if you find that you're cynical, pray. Realize you're in danger right now. You're being cut off from your nation. You're being cut off from your source of life. We would rather be naive believers who are connected to our power than the smart, philosophical people who are figuring it out in our heads. It also speaks that before Yaakov went in, Hashem comes to communicate with him. And Hashem makes promises and Yaakov makes vows. And I don't know what that could mean. I hope everyone has a way to communicate with Hashem, and if only it would be on a revealed way. But it seems to be a very important part of the journey. And then Yaakov shows up, and right away, he's not playing small, he's not hiding. He uses his voice, he confronts the shepherds, he speaks up. He's a very active player in his journey. Before I'll go into, the different portals that are introduced here, Rachel and Leah, I'll share a quote that came from a talk of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says that, there's this conflict in our generation if we can take on the avoda of Avraham and just keep on surrounding ourselves in Torah and mitzvos and in light and in love and in or if we have to confront the darkness. Like, what is our path today? And the Rebbe says here how our temporary foray into the non-spiritual milieu of the material world, with the aim of elevating it, will not only not have a detrimental effect on us, they will actually prove beneficial to our spiritual growth. In fact, the only way we can grow is by taking on the challenges of our personal Haran. And so over here, we're told, the marching orders for our generation is to go into Haran. And I think that when we think about going into our darkness, we think about other people's, the concept of darkness in general. And it literally feels like we're taking on shalosh klipos hatmeos, we're taking on demons, we're taking on vultures, we're taking on such a world that feels so terrifying to us. And something that I'm noticing or like coming to understand, and it's not fully processed, but I'll share so far what I have with this, is you're not taking on the entire realm of darkness on your own, right? Like when you approach the concept of leaning into healing work, you might see it as, it's me and now I have to step into this dark terrain and I'm going to be swallowed up inside of it, right? And all the fear that comes. In your family's line, there were certain experiences and truths that couldn't be looked at. They couldn't be seen in the present moment. And so they got filed away and put into a cabinet with the hope that one day a child would come and they would have enough material success in their life that they'll be able to access healing work. And they'll go to the file cabinet and they'll say to their grandparent or great-grandparent, what did you leave here for me? What do you need to integrate into our family's truth in order for us to walk into Mashiach? What has not been looked at and surrendered to and appreciated? And the terrain of darkness is everything that you once had to push to the side. It's not the realm of darkness. It's not everything that there is. And for me, I had a shift within my own understanding when I, wanted to lean into the idea of lean into the darkness, let the darkness come. When I understood that it's not the depths of darkness, it's what my mind in my childhood wasn't willing to look at, or my soul or my heart. And it's my portion. And I've seen the Alter Rebbe speak about how, it's the work of outreach. Chabad, we are defined as shluchim. We do value Avram Avinu's role of being the lamplighters of the world and being literally being the actors in Avram Avinu's covenant to spread and inspire. And the Alter Rebbe pleads and says, but don't forget about the prime real estate that's beneath your soul. Every soul has a shadow. That's just how we made it to where we are. There were things that couldn't be looked at. And with all of the abundance that we have today and all of the light and all of the messianic tools and energy we have, we're told that, and especially in this week's Parsha, we can welcome this experience of collecting the parts of ourselves that were lost in the darkness, knowing that beneath it, it's, we reconnect to our soulmate, we reconnect to our full tribe and Shevet, if we're willing to go there. Now I'll speak a little bit about Rachel and Leah. In Chassidus, it says that Leah represents the concealed world of thought, and Rachel represents the revealed world of speech and dibur. She was physically beautiful, and you were able to see it, whereas in order to appreciate Leah, you had to go deeper into the space of her inner hidden world, which is her thoughts. And Rachel and Leah each represent different, like a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey of Hashem's name. Leah is the first yud and hey, and Rachel is the vav and the hey. Vav is embodied, it's down here in this world, where Leah's yud doesn't reach this world, it's above the world. And what came to me also when I was, leaning into Leah, it says on Shabbos, Hashem takes all of creation and it reverts to his thoughts. Prior to the world being created, Hashem had thoughts of creating the world. Then Hashem spoke it in words to create the world. And the entire week we exist through Hashem's speech. He's constantly re-uttering creation and speaking it, and then on Shabbos, because you don't plan and you don't create on Shabbos, we revert to machshava, to God's thoughts. It's like this more intimate, I'll take you in deeper, I'll take you deeper into me. And that's the domain of Leah. She's that deeper hidden realm that's very hard to understand and that's very hard to access. But if you look at the story of Leah, you see how she's the mother, the face of divinity. Because we can't see Hashem, right? No one can see Hashem and live. Hashem gave us with rachamim tzadikim. And if we look at the avos and imahos, we can have a sense of what God actually looks like. And so we spoke a little bit about Avram and Yitzchak, what they represent and show us about Hashem. And now if you look at Leah and Rachel and what they show us about Hashem, Leah shows us the power and the ability to change your destiny no matter what. Even though you're birthed, your parents brought you into the world with a certain intention and plan, and God agreed to that. Leah shows up and she doesn't buy into it. She prays and cries and prays and cries, and she changes her mazel so drastically that she goes from the possibility of being married to the warrior Russia, who was raping women, who was seducing women for marriages, from harming animals, right? That's what she was hearing about this man Esav. And she manages to bring herself to become the mother of most of the 12 Shvatim. We also see her power of changing destiny when she's carrying a boy inside of her womb, and she prays and accesses a part of God that transforms this baby into a girl. But I'll share that, this parsha is so, it's very emotional to me. Like it always has been, like the source of so many questions for me, and so much of my heart story comes from this parsha, which is probably why I'm more disassociated this week than any other week, to not be able to feel all the emotion and pain. But I very much resonated with Leah. I felt her experience of being unwanted, of being hated. And it always bothered me that how can Yaakov be considered a tzaddik if his wife was hated? Like, doesn't the definition of tzaddik mean that the marriages you build are holy and are inviting divinity? And if you have a wife who feels hated, what is holy about that? And I spent a lot of time like in that question and in that pain of Leah. And in talking to people and looking for answers and looking for clarity, I was told that, Leah, the tikkun of Leah, if we want to rectify Leah's energy, we would have to move away from victimhood. That in a way we sense how all of her children are named for her pain. God saw my shame and embarrassment. God heard my pain and my embarrassment. And when I heard that, something did not settle right by me. And, that might be my bias and my blind spot. But very soon after that experience, I opened something and I saw how Leah is the matriarch. She's the first person in the world to embody gratitude to Hashem. She's the first person to feel praise and thanks to Hashem in her body and in an embodied way. So she's the portal of gratitude. And if we look at our practice, our spiritual practice, the way our davening is based off of, most of it is Psukei de Zimra, praise of God. And one of the highest forms of being connected to Hashem is all through praise, right? Feeling gratitude immediately brings you into your heart space. If you want to thank Hashem for 5 things that Hashem did to you that day, and you try to lean into the energy of those gifts, you will be in your heart. It is a portal into your heart. And she brought us there. And how did she bring us there? How did she birth this channel and gift it to all of her descendants? By feeling her pain, by literally going into the darkness of her pain and being aligned with it and feeling it to the depths of where God was sending her. What I sense is that she trusted the journey and she was all in on the journey, and eventually the journey took her to gratitude, to the point where she birthed Malchus into the world, where she was able to have children who would be capable of being leaders, who are loyal and able to show the rest of the Jewish people how to conduct themselves. And Mashiach comes from Yehuda, from that child of praise and thanks. So we know the power and the importance of gratitude and hodah. And I see that because I see that in my own journey, that her children are all named for her human pained experience. She's not, even though she was so committed to the future, to building the Jewish nation, to the children she would one day have, she doesn't bypass her own part in the story. She's the mother of these children, and this is the story of how they were birthed. Their name is literally their essence, and it's captured, and it almost to a point where it feels uncomfortable, like, why are you burdening your children with the way you felt hated and your lack of love and with your shame and with your embarrassment? Like, why does your child have to carry that experience? But that is how her children were born, under those conditions, within a marriage that looked the way it did. And, ultimately when I see Leah, I have a lot more to say, but I think that Leah is the mother that gives men and women the strength to endure a very painful marriage throughout Galus. There are marriages that don't get to be held in love, and there are times in marriage that don't get to be held in love. There are seasons and stages, and there were times in our history where we couldn't marry for love, and that didn't get to be a frontline value that we merited to have. And Leah shows us, and we lean into Leah for the strength to get through those phases or those lifetimes. And hopefully that gives us strength to know that it's just for this lifetime. Because what she builds from that, the fact that she chooses that and she doesn't give up on that, shows us, what the pain channeled will actually eventually lead to. It's not in vain. It's a part of the story, and it's a painful part of the story, right? And another thing I'll say about Leah, last week we ended the class by asking, why couldn't Rivka Imenu she had such a safe and beautiful marriage, we're told, why couldn't she have an open dialogue, open communication with Yitzchak and say, Esav is not the son that you thought he was? And the commentators gave us two explanations for why it couldn't be. They said that there are some things that are so great and so high that if we try to fit them in our rational mind and explain them and box them up to human understanding, we would limit the space that God has to work within that portal. It can't fit in a mind. It has to have access into this world beyond the mind. And so she knew that, and she surrendered to that. And the second part was that many great things had to be hidden in the mystery of darkness, the mix of black and white, of good and bad, in order to be, slip into the world unnoticed. And the examples we were, told were the blessings of Esav, right? The blessings that went to Yaakov, and the experience that Yehuda and Tamar are going to have one day, right? We're going to get to that in the parsha, in a few parshios, where Yehuda chooses to sleep with a prostitute, right? And he falls to that level. Why? Because God needs a channel to birth the seed of Mashiach through Yehuda. And the darkness was so excited and eager that they had such a high man in their grips. And they thought, okay, if we take this seed and we slip it into the world, a prostitute's going to raise this child, and Yehuda will for sure not be raising this child. And so the seed of Mashiach will get farther and farther and farther from the light. It will be taken into darker realms than we had now. They relinquish it hoping that this world would do such damage on this round. It's like levels in a game. And little did they know that Yehuda had the capacity for honesty and for teshuvah, because he comes from Leah. His mother taught him how to change his destiny and how to lean into teshuvah. Most of Leah's children are actually the ones that are the portal of teshuvah, which is why they're the ones to sell Yosef, and then they all come and lean into the process of teshuvah, right? But over here, what I'm noticing is that there's darkness that plays itself out in this parsha, and it's under a chuppah this time. Instead of in Yitzchak's bedroom where he's about to get the blessings, the stage where the deception takes place is under a chuppah, where Leah is put under a veil and brought out to this marriage. And her father and her sister are, playing an active role here, and she's playing a role as well, but in a more of a passive way. And it seems to me that the prize, the covenant, the spark that got slipped into the Jewish people through this back door, through this gray door, is Leah, right? She can't come into the marriage as the wife of Yaakov in a way of honesty, in a way of planning, in a way of truthfulness. And so through the dark side, Hashem brings her into the Jewish people, and she becomes a founding mother of the Jewish people. And then ultimately, it's, going back to the role of sisterhood, Leah gives back. She gives up having another shevet by davening to Hashem that her seventh child, Dinah, be turned into, Yosef be turned into a girl, and Dinah. Okay, now we'll finish off with Rachel Imenu. And it says how Rachel embodied beauty in a very revealed way, and perfection. She was the love of Yaakov's life from the get-go, and he always loved her. And her children, Yosef and Binyamin, always remain tzaddikim. They always remain in perfection of their mission and spirit, and they never depart from their divine soul, because they come from Rachel, and they get the strength from Rachel for that. And Rachel shows us and births the portal of mercy, of compassion for her sister. She opens the door to sisterhood for us. And she is the world of speech, of revelation, and of outward beauty. She represents this world and the experience of this world. And then at the end of her life, she shows us the longing of a soul, and also in her ability to witness herself and see her own greatness. So it says that, Rachel chose to be buried on the outskirts of town because she had a prophecy that her children would one day be exiled, and they would be carried in chains by Nebuchadnezzar. And she wanted to give her children strength and hope and give them access to a portal of a righteous person to daven next to. And so she chooses to be buried along the boundary line where her children would one day walk. And it says that Hashem was undecided about whether or not he would forgive the Jewish people. He was exiling them in chains because they had served Avodah Zarah and idols. And all the greats came to God and they pleaded with Hashem to forgive the people and allow them to come home. And Hashem was not being moved by any, until Rachel Imenu came and she said, God, I had compassion on my sister and allowed her to enter into my marriage, and I didn't allow my jealousy of my sister to get in the way. How will you not release your jealousy that the Jewish people served another God? And Hashem heard her and took her words and chose to say to her, your children will return to their borders. When I was seeing that, it was showing me the importance of the matriarchs, of us women, seeing the work that we did, like being an aid and testifying to the work we did, because the work is not over once we did it. Our work has power and plays a role after, as if we're willing to testify to it. We bring it back to life by drawing on those previous experiences and highlighting where we held our humanness and accessed our divine soul again and again. And then I'm going to end off this class, talking a little bit about Haran. In last week's class, we spoke about Esav and how Esav represents our Yetzer Hara, our Nefesh Bahamis, our survival instinct, and our human self. And I was sharing how, Esav is not bad. He's the part of us that survived our exile and our life, and how if we will hold space with compassion, if we will invite Esav into the holding of our soul and witness what he went through, we will be able to, bring about the prophecy of Mashiach, where Yaakov and Esav will be harnessed and they will work together as one. And what I was realizing after the class, which is, comes right back to this week with the concept of going into our Haran, we said that Esav comes from the world of Tohu, which is chaos, which is unboundaried. Like, it cannot be contained. It destroys. The energy is so strong, it has the capacity to destroy. And Yaakov comes from the world of Tikkun, which is rectified. It's vessels that could contain. And what we're doing is we're building a vessel, and then we're inviting Esav and the Tohu energy of our own life, of our own survival experiences, into the vessels that we created. Which is, why Yaakov's time in yeshiva prior to marriage was what determined his success. And again, it's if we want our children to be able to show up to marriage ready to confront the darkness that comes with the gift of being next to your soulmate, the years, the yeshiva years, the learning years prior to marriage need to be years of a cocoon, of holding, of purity, of truth, if we want to have success within our marriages and build the families that we want to have. But what I'm noticing is the world of Tohu has chaotic, wild power. And how do we access that? How do we merit to access light like that? When we transform a piece of Esav inside of ourselves. God gave us a life, a childhood, and in that childhood we live from our survival state. Our soul, our neshama doesn't come into us until we're 12 and 13. So we start out living from our Esav space, and hopefully in the right environment, our parents and our teachers and our community keep us in check, right? And then our soul comes in, and slowly there's a transformation that's supposed to happen. The older brother is supposed to surrender that the older brother is older, and it's time for him to lead the way. And in doing so, Yaakov will have access to the realms of Tohu, to the power and the strength of an animal, right? To plow a field, I was talking about, last week, the power of certain fears I had and seeing that they were literally destroying my life, right? Now, if I would take that power and it would channel, and I would bring it into my life in a channeled and rectified way, I have access to a voltage system that was hardwired into me and created within me over, right, 30 plus years of life, and use that to my soul's advantage. And the way that we are able to bridge these worlds together and give ourselves the gift of the wild world and of the power and of the pleasure that comes from Tohu is if we're willing to hold space for the Tohu and invite the Esavs in our life, into our space for the healing that happens. And like I said, the Rebbe points out how the darkness has no fear and no shame, and we should learn from them and go about our mission and just pray and strive that it should be done without fear and with a lot of holy chutzpah. Thank you.